Introducing
Real estate people.
Hey, we're the Bills! What are you talking about, Willis?
We're the real estate people.
I gotta get into the mindset. We're a seller, put their house up, sold it. We talked on several episodes about receiving offers, accepting offers, marketing your house. So you marketed, you've accepted offers, and now today we're talking about closing. So preparing for the closing date.
Yeah, this is the final step. This is you've done all the things. It's been a couple months. Actually, for a seller, it could be 3 months, 4 months sometimes, depending on, your timing and how much work needs to be done before you actually list the property. And sometimes there's staging involved, and there's, we talked about commission and how that all works, and negotiating commission and what an agent actually does. Now you've marketed the property. You've had showings, you've had open houses, you got an offer, you negotiated, and then there's the whole transition that's 60 days from the time you actually sign a contract with a buyer to the day that you're closing. And it's a whirlwind. I mean, to say the least, it's a whirlwind.
Yeah, it's 60 days and 16 different professionals. So somebody needs to hold everybody accountable and that contract accountable to get to the finish line.
Yeah.
Or else everything that you did before that was irrelevant, right?
Right. And I mean, our last episode, we had Megan in. She's our transaction coordinator on the team. And it's what a valuable person to have on the team to make sure that everyone is doing what they need to do on time. Everyone is moving along. I mean, I don't know. It seems like with us, with real estate agents, we have our eyes on it all the time. We're pretty much a part of every single step of the process. When somebody is dragging their feet, we're the ones that's calling and reminding people of what they need to do. The seller or the buyer, depending on the side of the transaction, is always texting us and calling us, and we need to be on top of that stuff. So Megan is super valuable. But doesn't it seem like sometimes, I don't know, depending on what the professional's role is in the transaction, it doesn't seem like it's on the top of their priority list. Maybe they're what are some of the roles along the way that they're doing so many and they just have a small part, but their small part is so important.
And as you were just saying that, I was tying that back to compensation, right? So inspectors come in the deal, it's $500 to $750, they're out. Appraisers come in, again, $500 to $750, they're out. Lawyers come in, $500 to $750, it seems to be a common thread.
Yeah.
They're out, but the agent's the one that has to be the pusher because their compensation is tied directly to that closing. And I was just thinking about as you were talking, what if it wasn't? What if it was a realtor gets $1,000 per closing? Then they're not going to be that pushing force to get these things to closing when these transactions oftentimes need that push to get there. So I was just thinking about if we were, as realtors, charging a flat fee per transaction, how less transactions would probably close. And it's good that you're tying that closing into that production because there's nothing there if it doesn't close. And then if it gets there, you get a percentage of the transaction. And then, people, have to pay 3 points to get it there to push. So imagine if we weren't paid commission. That'd be weird.
It would be weird.
We'd be like every other professional, just taking their fee, doing their job, and then getting out, waiting for everybody else. You kind of need a commission-based person in that transaction to push them. I never thought of it like that.
Yeah. I hesitate because I'm kind of thinking. I think a lot of we're talking about commission again, and we'll get back to the closing. But I think
we got to go cut this back into episode 2.
Yeah,
it's interesting thought though, because the deals get so complicated, which is what we're talking about, right? Closing process, and the agent is the one who really falls at our feet to make sure this thing closes, to get through all of those obstacles. And the first one on the list, oftentimes when you accept a contract, is the repairs that need to be made resulting from the home inspection from the seller's perspective. And that's the one thing the buyer's agent and the buyer are looking at the final walkthrough, where all of those items in that inspection release done. So as the seller, that's your responsibility.
Yeah. All right. So let's go back because it's 7 a.m. here. We're just getting rolling. We're getting comfy. And today we do want to talk about preparing for closing. So you've gone through everything and now you're so close. Maybe the date has been scheduled that you're going to close. We want to talk about what should the seller be doing? How can they prepare so that the final walkthrough goes really well with the buyer? What are some of the other things that they need to do that maybe some people just don't think about until they're actually selling a home? And then, we want to get into where is the closing? When does everyone get paid? When does the seller get paid and all that? So let's start with the repairs.
Preparing the house for the final walkthrough.
Yeah.
So it's oftentimes buyers purchase a house, have a home inspection. There's some repairs that need to get done prior to closing. So those items can range anywhere from, fixing a trap underneath the sink that could be a couple $100 fix towards, repointing the side of a garage to make sure the structural facade of the brick is taken care of. So those are items that the buyer now, because they're on the inspection release and become part of the contract, need to get done. So getting those items and that work taken care of prior to the final walkthrough, just making sure, because of the final walkthrough, if that work's not done, the buyer can be entitled to some sort of credit for that work not being done per the contract.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, the work needs to be done by a licensed professional. Is that how it always needs to be done? Is there a way to work it out with the buyer if you're the seller? Hey, I got an uncle who can do it. I mean,
the document reads like stuff that would require, licensed and insured contractors get done by licensed and insured contractors. So get the receipts that they're licensed, get their paperwork that shows they're licensed, get their paperwork that shows they have insurance, because buyer could ask for that stuff. And it's in there unless otherwise agreed upon, I guess.
Okay.
But you should always be having licensed and insured people doing work on your home, in my opinion. I know a lot of people go around that sometimes, and there's reasons too, but for the most part, keep it above board.
We should do a whole episode at one point about things that we've seen owners do around the house, maybe not even in preparation for selling, but sometimes these owner projects that they do.
Yeah, how they get
oh my
done.
God. Like some of the electrical I've seen in houses and just some of the repairs. It's like, wow, this person is a jack of all trades, but definitely not mastering anything.
And a lot of times it's like the contractors that are doing the work that they're not even qualified. So just asking them for their insurance certificates and licenses, you're going to weed out a lot of people when you figure out who's the best person to work on your home.
Yeah. So the first thing is make sure that all the work that you promised to do is done. It's in a satisfactory way, all above board, preferably licensed contractor. You have the receipts so that on that final walkthrough, the buyer is put at ease that everything is done, that you've fulfilled your side of the agreement.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, what about documents and when you're preparing to go to closing, when you're getting close to the end, what are some of the things that a seller should be collecting and putting aside and making sure that they have everything organized? What are some of the things that they're going to have to bring to closing?
Yeah, so some of the documents that get updated throughout the process are the search and survey. So oftentimes those could stay in electronic files between the professionals, but as a seller, get a copy of the survey that you paid for. That's that 11 by 6. How big is the survey? I don't even know how big
I don't know
is.
either.
But it's regular, maybe legal paper, but whatever survey that you paid for to have updated, get a copy of it.
Yeah.
Get a copy of the title report that you again paid to have updated, just to have it in your records, and then copy of the purchase agreement, all contract documents. It's good to just have all. I mean, you're selling the house, so
yeah.
How important is it post closing? Depends on how. I don't know. Those records don't come into play for IRS type stuff or anything like that. But you paid for all this stuff, you might as well get a copy of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to all that too, I mean, every transaction is different. And so there's going to be different documents that are going to be needed for different situations and different things you have to do. But keep in communication with your agent or the transaction coordinator. They're going to give you an idea of all the things you need to do. And so it's really important to be checking your emails often, responding to texts whenever you get one, whoever it's from, but especially from transaction coordinator, the person who's got their eyes on everything. And so stay in constant communication. I've said this before, I think, but when I bought my house, I just told myself, like, if this thing is going to be held up in any way, it's not going to be my fault.
Right.
I'm always going to do what I need to do as soon as I need to do it. That's a good.
And if you don't, like, there could be points within that contract process where the buyer can cancel the deal on you, and then you're back to square one too. So the transaction coordinator and the agent help you know, like, the liability that exists from not doing, some of those items that are required by the seller or agreed upon in the contract.
Yeah.
But take care of all your business, and then if you do this right, as from a seller's perspective, like, you do the right prepping, you price the property right, then the deal that you actually sign on, like, offer day, like, you're going to be able to close at those terms at the closing day. If you don't do this right, you're going to get dinged at the inspection, you could get dinged at the appraisal, and you could get dinged at the final walkthrough. So you could go under contract today for $200 and then close at $180. But that's not a good situation to be in. Like, you got to protect that equity through the transaction, not until the day you receive an offer. So, the contract states, like, the seller's going to deliver the property in the same condition it was at during the inspection. So maintain the property the same way you would, because you are the owner still. Same with the exterior maintenance too. Make sure the grass is cut, snow's removed. Like, that's part of the contract to make sure that the house is delivered that way, in that broom swept condition. And if you don't, as the seller, then you're opening yourself up to liability, whether that's the buyer not closing or buyer closing, but at a different price than what was agreed upon originally in the contract.
Yeah. I mean, I just had a closing recently with a seller that, they didn't mow the lawn. And I went over there before the final walkthrough, and the lawn was like, wow. It was at least a foot deep.
Yeah, but dude, if you were getting $1,000 to close that transaction, you wouldn't cut that lawn.
Well, I didn't cut the lawn, but I was ready to.
Like, no, same way the lawyer wouldn't come cut the lawn either, right? Because he's already, you know what I mean? The fee is not tied to the closing.
Yeah.
I mean, it is, because they're not necessarily going to get paid unless it closes too, but
yeah.
I mean, you got to do what it takes. And but it's just our job as the agents to, like, give them the information, explain to them how this is, like, supposed to look. And we do a good job of that, like, 24 hours before the final walkthrough, calling the seller and letting them know, hey, or even before, like, a day before, but keep the electric on, keep the gas on, keep the water on. That is your responsibility until closing. People don't even do that sometimes. And then and the banks are going to require, if you're selling it to a buyer with the lender, that the electric's on, the gas is on, the water's on. If that stuff's not on at the final walkthrough, which we just had this happen to the other day, the seller was, like, a seasoned real estate person, stopped the gas service in the upper. So when it came time to the final walkthrough, they couldn't test the furnace, the hot water tank. They didn't know the gas lines were working. So they were talking about putting $30,000 in escrow just to account until the gas got turned back on and they could fire up the mechanics of that house. So, your job is to let the seller know that, hey, this is the final walkthrough, this is what it means, this is what the contract states, and this is what the buyer's agent, is expecting tomorrow. And if they don't get that, this is what could happen. So it's just protecting. It's staying 10 steps ahead of the deal consistently so that there's no liability and you can.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the process, though, like, when you're selling a house and you're moving on to something else, just like when you're leaving a job, you give your 2 weeks notice or your 1 month notice. Toward the end, you're kind of checked out. It's really hard to stay super motivated and strong all the way to the finish line. And so I do see with sellers sometimes that they're like, well, I'm almost done. Like, maybe they've already moved into the other place. Maybe they're checked out. And I think that's what happened with a recent seller of mine with the lawn. They
already moved the lawnmower to the new house.
Yeah, the lawnmower wasn't there. The lawn was a foot deep. There was some stuff going on in the basement that wasn't cleaned up. It was just kind of a mess.
Was it?
I don't know
if I number 8.
No,
it wasn't that one?
No. She was amazing.
She called me the other day and said, please call the new owner and tell them to mow the lawn because the neighbor was getting mad. It's funny when that happens, like post closing.
So the new owner came in, and this was over a month ago. The one you're talking about on Daisy, right? Mm-hmm. And so the new owner hasn't been keeping up with the property. So the neighbors are texting the previous owner, like,
who's then reaching out to me to call the new buyer and tell them to please mow the lawn. I'm like,
yeah. I mean,
all right,
that
we
goes
got
into
it.
if you're the new owner of a house and you want to get in good with the neighbors, like cut the lawn, because that's your first impression. Like, holy crap, this person has owned the house for 2 weeks and the lawn is already like
it's a bad
jungle.
first look.
Yeah. But if you don't cut the lawn, if you don't maintain the property, you're either going to have to go over there and do it before closing, or if the buyer is feeling extremely generous, they may let it slide.
Right.
But usually not.
But a good buyer's
They're like, "What the
agent's
heck?"
going to be like, come on.
Yeah.
Like,
or you're going to have to put money in escrow so that when they own it, they have money to pay a professional lawn service.
Right.
It's one thing to mow a lawn and like keep it maintained, but if a lawn has been growing for like a month, you need professionals to come in, because at that point you got like new trees
yeah, it's
sprouting
not
up
just
and
a
stuff.
maintenance. It's a cleanup.
Yeah.
I want to talk for a second, Eric. There's always like an insane amount of friction right at this final loop, like to close this transaction. And just to like give all the professionals in the industry a little bit of grace here, because the closing's down to the day, right? So that's tax amount that you're responsible for as a seller to the day. It's water expense to the day. It's county, school, village, whatever taxes, user fee, sewer rents to the day. So no one knows until like that day is final, like, and all the attorneys agree on it. So if there's a bank, a buyer, and a seller, that's 3 lawyers that all need to sync on which day this thing's actually getting recorded. So you don't get that closing statement, which shows you like the distribution of proceeds until like the day before closing. And that always drives people crazy, right? Because on the buyer's end, it's like, oh, I have to take a day off work, go get certified checks, go to the bank. Like, you really don't have much time to prep for this. And then same from the seller's perspective too. Like, they're getting X amount. Now how much of it is theirs in their pocket, and when are they getting their funds? So, but because this is all done down to the day, which makes sense, that you don't get this statement until a couple of days before. So for all the people like buying and selling, like, give the professionals a little bit of grace here, because we don't even know either until that final day and that statement's prepared for that day, which could be just a day before the closing day.
Okay. All
Does
right.
that make sense?
Yeah.
And there's
then-
a lot of friction there for a buyer who's got to go get the proceeds to close. And
Yeah.
then there's a lot of pressure for the seller who's like, where's my money? You know, it does. There's a little bit of friction there, but you'll get through it.
Yeah.
It's only like 1 or 2 more days.
So you want to make sure that you sit down with your agent or the transaction coordinator or whoever you need to look over that document to make sure
Always.
that all the numbers are
Always.
correct.
Just because lawyers are preparing them doesn't mean that they're always right.
Yeah.
And a good agent will be reviewing that closing statement with their seller every single time.
Yeah.
A good buyer's agent will be reviewing what the closing disclosure states that the bank's giving about like how much they're getting charged for the bank for borrowing the money.
Okay.
Every time, line item, like there's always mistakes on there. And on that closing statement, that's
Always?
not always.
Very common.
Yes, there's mistakes on them often.
Okay.
But like you'll have that main amount that the house sold for at the top, and then you'll like see all the debits and credits. So from a seller's perspective, you're going to be crediting the buyer for the amount they already have in deposit. We talked about that in a few episodes before. You're going to see any other credits that exist on the contract for whatever reason. So any credits given to buyer, including the credit for the deposit check. And then depending on like when tax season is, like you could have paid taxes in the like for the future year that you're not going to live there. So then you have to do adjustments one way or the other, buyer or seller, for the taxes that were paid. Same for like the water escrow. So that's where you see like all the different line items where it takes your, $200,000 purchase price and you get about 180 to 185 of that. And it shows where that $15,000 went. And you really should be going line by line, making sure it's all correct on every closing statement.
Yeah. And in every step of the process, you're going to get these documents. You're going to get something that seems overwhelming and very confusing that you're trying to look at. And I think a lot of people have a hard time admitting when they don't know something. Kind of just embarrassing. Like you want to come across like you know what's going on.
Right.
But it would be strange if someone knew everything that was going on all the way through it. I mean, the reason that there's professionals is because it's confusing, because there's all these words that are a foreign language to the normal person. And so if you get a statement or you get something that you're confused about, call your agent and have them walk you through it until you understand. If you
don't have an agent there, you're calling your lawyer who prepared it, right?
Right, sure.
So like now you got to go lean on the person that's already giving you information that you don't know. You know what I mean? And it's hard as a consumer to, like, once your lawyer gives you something, to call them back and be like, hey, what did it mean? What does this mean? Or what does that mean? And that's part of what the realtor does. Is it, like, we've talked about this at nauseum through these podcasts, but it's that confidence. It's the accountability.
Yeah.
It's the track record. It's the been here, like, knowing how to do this and knowing the process, protocol, and all that stuff that, like, a realtor gives somebody. But yeah, the confidence, that document, like, where all that money went. But this is the point, like, to me, is like a realtor, like, it gets fucking real, guys. Like, on this closing statement, a consumer who sold their house for $200,000 is going to see $12,000 paid in commission if they're paying 6% commission. Now, that's a real moment, right? A seller, like, they could think you're so freaking great, did everything right, hit all the boxes, sold for X amount of dollars over the list price, whatever, just did a stellar job, but they're still saying, oh my God, $12,000. And, like, you need to be prepared to answer that question of what you're going to do for that commission and how it makes sense for someone to hire you and pay you that much money to do it. Because it gets real. Like, this is the last thing they see. Closing statement, $12,000 going to Keller Williams Realty. And if you don't do a good job, they're going to be like, they're going to hate realtors, right?
Even
like,
if you do a good job.
Even if you do a great job, they're still going to be like, what the hell?
All of a sudden, the perspective of the agent is, this greedy jerk.
Yeah.
Like, well, I know they gave me good service, but do they deserve that much?
It's a chunk at the end, bro.
Yeah.
A giant chunk. And, like, what are you doing to validate your chunk?
Yeah.
It's not just about houses. That's the whole thing. Like, this is about how real estate brings value to your life from an investment and financial perspective, how to make sure people, like, realize some of that before they don't get the opportunity to do so.
Yeah. You had mentioned earlier about how everything is down to the day, and I was just thinking about utilities and stuff. So there is a point where the electric and the gas needs to be transferred over to the new owner. What is that process? What do we have to do to prepare for closing? You know, like, and what is the order? So let's say National Grid, that's our
So here's first
service.
protocol. Don't call any of the utility companies to shut off service until the lawyer tells you that there's a closing date in the books.
Okay.
So until the lawyer says, hey, can you close on Thursday? Yes. Okay, let me confirm with the other two. Hey, closing's confirmed for Thursday. That's the date you shoot for. And you have to maintain them in your name until closing date, so through closing. So,
okay, so just as a reminder, the closing date on the contract is not a set in stone date. That is a target date.
Yeah, it's
usually,
like when
right?
you're going through pregnancy, right? They give you a target date.
That's a great example.
They give you a target date for the baby. Baby's due date is whatever, but then it's really upon the doctor's schedule, you know, towards the end of it,
right. Or how things are going, and
kind of that same vibe. But once that date's in stone, that's when you call whoever your gas, electric, water providers are and say, hey, I sold my house. I'm not going to be the owner come Friday, X date. So please shut the utilities off or take them out of my name on the date after closing. And then the buyer is responsible to call and get those switched over. And then what everyone wants to avoid is there being a gap in service. Because if there's a gap in service, now it's a whole new process to set up utilities. You have to go from like a transfer to a setup, which is now like field inspections by the utility companies. That's what everyone's trying to avoid.
Okay. Is there a certain amount of days before closing that you need to be making these phone calls? Like, or is it just when you have a date you can call?
When the date's set, call for the day after. To take them out of your name the day after is what I always do.
Okay.
Give the buyer a little bit of grace to call that morning, that afternoon, that night, or the following morning.
Okay.
But by the end of the next day is when I take them out of my name, and I let the other side know that we're doing that. So, but a buyer's agent's going to be forward thinking about this part with their client as well.
Okay. So you've done all the work, licensed contractors, you have all the paperwork, you have the closing statement in front of you. You've gone over it. You kind of understand where all the money is going. You have called the utility company, and the day
Got all your stuff out of the house. We didn't talk about that.
Yeah, you get all your stuff out, broom swept condition, unless it's agreed upon with the buyer that you're leaving something behind, or unless it's nailed, glued, or screwed, which is a fixture. Those are things that you leave behind. The final walkthrough happens, which is the day before
Even
closing.
the paint, everybody. I know everyone like feels like it's okay to leave a bunch of paint cans in your garage and basement, but take the paint out too, unless the buyers agreed to take the paint.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
You see that all the time. Like if it's a fixture for the house, a door, like something like that, like, but just ask permission. But it's supposed to be broom swept every area: basement, attic, crawl space, first floor, second floor, etc.
So we're talking like, I've owned my house for almost 10 years now. I have all this old scrap wood from different projects I've done, and I have paint cans from like 3 colors ago in my daughter's room, and there's like this much. Yeah, there's just a tiny bit left in it. And so you're saying all that stuff. What about like extra pieces of siding?
Unless the other side agrees.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's relating to the house today, it's probably going to be okay. But
Okay.
communication solves all discrepancy, right?
Right. Okay. It's good to know. So the final walkthrough happens. The buyer agrees. Everything looks great. Where does the closing actually happen?
So pre-COVID, it happened at the clerk's office, which I believe is like 95 Franklin. So Erie County clerk's office.
Okay.
Where like buyers, seller, lawyers would all meet in a little room that like resembled like your elementary school cafeteria with like little wooden tables and little wooden chairs. And
Yeah.
like they were over there, you were over here, and like you signed and they signed, and there's like 3 copies and all this like craziness. But since COVID, they stopped doing that. So now it's really just seller's attorney meets seller to sign, buyer's attorney meets buyers to sign what they need to sign, and then like buyer's attorney will normally meet seller's attorney at the seller's legal office to finish it, and then one of the attorneys go down to the clerk's office to actually do the recording.
And these
which like sometimes doesn't happen either, which is fucked up. But like we can talk about all that shit that shouldn't happen that happens all the time, like on other episodes. But
Okay.
like sometimes like
it.
Ryan and I just had a situation where we bought something, dude, 45 days after we gave them the money to close, they recorded it. Yeah, I know. I know. What do you do about that?
Yeah.
Like, how do you? It was crazy, but make sure it gets recorded.
And so it all comes down to communication again, right? Like your lawyer is going to tell you where the closing is going to be. Make sure you're checking your emails. Make sure you know where you're going and what time you need to be there, and be on time, and have all the stuff that they ask you to bring.
And sellers, it's a great touch too. Leave a note to like the new buyer, like the quirkiness of houses. Like every house has a little quirkiness. Like write a nice letter to the buyer, give them some instructions on things that they wouldn't know unless they asked you. And then oftentimes buyers and sellers communicate post-closing. I know a lot of agents that are like, hell no, like don't talk to my client. But like it happens all the time, and they're the best person to help that new person like now live in this house to the best of its ability. So
yeah, it's such a nice touch when sellers do that. They're like, hey, welcome to the new home. We lived here for how many years? We always loved it. Here's some things that you should know.
Right.
You know, the garage door, you got to like hit the enter twice sometimes. Sometimes, this doesn't work or that.
Turn off an extra valve to the exterior plumbing.
Exactly.
So something doesn't freeze.
Yeah.
Or put a coil around this water line just to protect yourselves, or gutter line or whatever.
What about keys? What happens with keys? Where should people leave them? Do they bring them to closing?
The contract states at closing, seller to provide all keys that they ever had relating to that house at closing. So most of the times, they're like a realtor has one key for the showings and to access the house.
Yep.
So oftentimes, like, let the buyer's agent take the key from the lockbox if the final walkthrough is successful, if they agree to not give it to the buyer prior to the closing date.
Yeah.
And then that alleviates listing agent's responsibility from tracking down keys post-closing. And then seller either leave the rest of the keys in the house, or you could bring the rest of the keys to your lawyer. And then your lawyers can transfer them give them to the buyer's lawyer at closing.
That's what I normally see is, there's the one key in the lockbox. The seller leaves all the rest of the keys and key fobs and garage door openers and all that, along with their little letter, you don't have to do the little letter, but with the letter that says "Welcome to your new home" kind of thing. Here's the quirks.
And buyers, very good idea to hire a locksmith and change all the locks just in case. You never know who could possibly have a key to your new home from however many years ago in the past. And it's a great time.
You make copies for your uncles and your aunts and your mom, whatever.
Switch the locks. It's a very good idea. And this is an awesome time to do a little ad read for our favorite local locksmith.
Who's that?
All right, this guy's dope. I met him at the poker room, the Seneca Niagara poker room, maybe 12 years ago. And it was so funny because we just kind of vibed on this not degenerate, but kind of wanting to play poker or whatever. And I don't think either of us play anymore. But I met him there. His name's Iran Harari. Red Key Locksmith Service.
I've seen him around.
Yeah, he's got maybe 10 to 12 trucks now.
Yeah,
so he's been growing his business steadily, over the last decade or so. Great guy, really forward with service. He'll come in at 2 a.m. and lock you, get you back into your house. He's done that for me several times. We refer him often to people. They love this guy. And it's not him doing the work anymore, which makes me proud, that he's got people that are providing the level of service that he was given to his people. Yeah, it's a
sign of a growing, successful business.
Yeah, and it's Red Key Lock Service, 716-244-1932. And because I'm a 90s baby, 716-244-1932.
Where you say it twice?
Yeah.
I always do that too.
Did you see that?
When I leave a message? No.
Gina just rolls her eyes. She's like, Nick, they could see it.
I know, they can see it. They're not even listening to the end. I'm always call me back. 716-213-8784.
Just in case you forgot that.
716-213. My gosh.
Nice podcast.
Yeah. One more thing, though. Receiving payment. When does everyone get paid? When does the seller get their money from the sale?
As soon as the seller's lawyer ties that check around the pigeon and sends them off to the post for you to go pick it up. Could be a 7-day turnaround.
Okay.
But it's normally hard checks. So you just have to get the hard checks from your lawyer who gets the checks and then deposit them in your bank account.
So it's within a week.
They're all certified checks, so it should be available in your account right away. But your lawyer gets the checks. They should get the checks from the buyer the day of closing.
Okay.
And then you should be able to grab them from your lawyer same day and then deposit them same day, money be available same day.
Dang.
If you got a lot of same day people involved.
Yeah. That's
not everyone's
a
same
pretty
day.
Exciting day. When you sell your house, a lot of times you've built equity over the years and you get that check and you're like, whoa.
It's been super rewarding for anybody that's bought real estate in our local market for the last 10 to 11 years. The market's just kept going up. I could see sometimes in the future where people bought houses, maybe a year or two ago that need to sell in the next couple of years where it may not be this romanticized experience. But at the end of the day, whether it's really good or really bad, there's money at the end, hopefully some equity for you to get into a more comfortable situation wherever people plan to be. So
great. Well, thanks for listening, everyone, to this seller series. We've covered buying, we've covered selling, and there's so many other things that we can cover. We'd like you to send us a message on Instagram, or if you have our emails or our phone numbers, text us. We'd love your input on things that you would like us to cover, guests that you would like us to have, maybe different companies that you'd like us to promote. And we're just so excited to continue growing and expanding. And
it's simple.
And
it's the Real Estate People podcast.
Yeah.
So real estate plays a role in everybody's life.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? From the moment you're born until the moment you leave, some sort of real estate is involved. So make it count, make it exceptional.
Absolutely. See you later. Bye. Now get out of here.